Hey guys, and welcome to the Random Watch Do channel. Thanks for joining me for another video, and today I'm making a video where I'm comparing a Neo-Vintage Seamaster with a modern Submariner. So modern versus Neo-Vintage, guys. Not a which is best. It's not a ranking out of 10 to tell you which I think is the best of these two marvellous watches. It's really just a comparison to show you the differences that I found between the two watches to help you maybe decide if you're in the market for a black diver's watch, which is kind of an essential ingredient in every watch collection. If you're in the market for a black diver's watch, do you go for a modern or do you go for a neo-vintage? And I'm just going to point out in this video, guys, the difference between the two styles. Okay guys, so let's start with the Neo-Vintage, and here I have my Seamaster 124060. So this is a watch from 2002, and this is what we commonly refer to, I guess, as Neo-Vintage. It's not quite old enough to be classified as vintage, so we call it Neo-Vintage or New Vintage. That's what the term means, really. It's a gorgeous watch, guys. So aluminium bezel. It's got that, I'll see if I can catch it here, it's got that wave pattern on the dial, which you might be able to see, the very subtle wave pattern on the dial. So, and it's got the sword hands. I mean, this is pretty much everything that I love about the Omega Seamaster. And probably the most important thing with this watch, this Neo-Vintage watch, this Neo-Vintage Seamaster, is the thickness. And this is critical, guys. I've got it on a NATO strap, and even with this double pass NATO strap, this is not a thick watch. Some watches, as soon as you try to put them on a NATO, they just absolutely bulge out on the wrist, you know, like a huge, I don't know, like a hockey puck. But the marvellous thing about these Neo-Vintage watches, guys, is due to the fact that the movement wasn't all that thick, they are really, really nice and thin, and they sit lovely and flat on the wrist, which means, ultimately, you can put this on a NATO. You can put this on a NATO and it still isn't too big. Whereas I happen to have a modern Submariner. Now, the modern Submariner, here we are. Here's the modern Submariner. This is the 124060. I've made a few videos about this now, so I won't harp on about it too much. But the modern Submariner, despite the fact, I mean, it's a thin watch. It's a thin watch, guys. It's, by today's standards, by modern standards, this is a thin watch. But if you compare it, and I'll stick it on top of the Seamaster here. Here are the two watches together. Now, keep in mind that the Seamaster's got a double pass NATO going through it. It's significantly thinner than the Rolex Submariner even, and this is a Rolex Submariner, of course, without a Cyclops. It's significantly thinner. So this watch is certainly very, very adaptable, and I would go as far as to say adaptable certainly for NATO straps, and it's also a more comfortable watch to wear on the wrist. Yes, I said it, guys, this watch is more comfortable to wear than this watch, and a lot of that is to do with just the sheer height of the watch. And of course, that's not to say that the Rolex is any slouch in other departments. It's got a better movement. It's 100% got a better movement, guys. There's no question of that. It's got a longer power reserve. It's got better anti-magnetism. Although one could argue that all of these additional features that the 32 series Rolex movement has, all of these additional features aren't necessarily in real life going to give you any better a life or any better an experience than this watch, which has a modified ETA movement in it. And what's the reason for that? I think the reason comes down to reliability, guys. I mean, what you want is a reliable movement that's accurate, and this has that. You know, this watch 100% has a reliable movement that's accurate. Now, the other thing that us watch dudes are really obsessive over, and here's a shot of the two watches together, and I will play some videos of these two watches just sat there together as well. But one of the other things that we need to compare when we're comparing a modern watch to a neo-vintage watch is the lume. So there you have it, guys. It's not an exhaustive comparison, but it's just a a rough comparison where I pitch up a modern Rolex Submariner with a Neo-Vintage Omega Seamaster. I've pointed out some of the differences that I found, and one of the clear differences that I found, and I pointed it out earlier on in the video, is that I actually think that that the Neo-Vintage Seamaster is a more comfortable watch to wear. Everything about it is slightly thinner, slightly finer, despite the fact that dimensions on paper, you might look at it and think, well, they're going to feel about the same. No, the Neo-Vintage Seamaster absolutely feels like a more comfortable watch on the wrist to wear, and it certainly is more adaptable. It's certainly more practical to wear on a NATO strap, especially a double pass NATO strap. I wouldn't wear a sub, to be honest with you, on a double pass NATO strap. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave us if you had to choose between a Neo-Vintage black diver's watch, and I think you don't get much better, by the way, than the 225 4.5, and I've made videos on that in the past. Where does that leave us? Particularly, and we mustn't discount this factor, is the price, because the price of a modern Submariner in New Zealand dollars is 16,000, whereas the price of one of these, even if you pay to get this fully serviced by an Omega service agent, and it will come back like brand new, even when you factor that cost in to a second-hand purchase, you're probably going to pay somewhere in the region of about a third as much. So this watch has probably cost me 5,500 to 6,000 New Zealand dollars all up to buy it, and this came with papers as well, which adds a little bit of value and certainly cost when you're buying one. All up, even when you fully service one of these Neo-Vintage dive watches, guys, you're still going to pay about a third the value of a brand new, and this is at retail, by the way. If you manage to get one at retail, a brand new one of these, a third of the price. So price has got to have an influence. It's a massive factor, isn't it? And then that just takes us down to the the bare knuckles of it, because I know that some of you guys are just going to want me to make a decision between the two. Some of you are so black and white and positive and negative, and you have to choose, Mark. If I had to choose, and here's the crux of it, if I had to choose between the modern sub and the Neo-Vintage Seamaster, guys, my choice would be, on a Monday, it would be the sub. On a Tuesday, it will be the Seamaster. On the Wednesday, it will be the sub. On the Thursday, it will be the Seamaster. And at the weekend, I'll probably put both watches on, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. Guys, there's no winner. There's no winner between these two. They're two spectacular watches, but what I hope to do during this video was point out some of the differences that might help you decide which to go for. And if I'm going to be brutal about it and look at the relative difference in price alone, every day of the week and twice on Sundays, you're going to go for the Seamaster, aren't you? That's the fact of it. This is a trophy watch. This is a watch that stays with you for the rest of your life, and that might be worth more to you as well. The fact that it is the sub, that might be worth more to you. But if you look at these two watches and just look at the pure practicality side of ownership and wearing them, the Seamaster probably edges it in that regard, but there's an emotional attachment also to a sub which kind of balances the two out. So my answer, I guess at the end of the day, my answer is buy both.